Whitney, let's go back to the beginning. Poindexter, Iran Contra, which I covered actually when I was in Nicaragua, because that's really the origin of where we are today.
Yeah, it's definitely, I would argue, one of the best starting points. And also, thanks so much for having me on, Chris. So, John Poindexter, as of course you know, was one of the national security advisors to Reagan and was the highest ranking member of his administration. That was indicted as part of Iran Contra, but he is also remembered as the quote unquote godfather of modern surveillance. And this is in part because of his efforts in the immediate post 9/11 era, pioneering an office within DARPA that housed a program called Total Information Awareness. So right after the Reagan administration, Poindexter was sort of in various roles throughout these tech companies that were sort of a prototype to what Palantir and Total Information Awareness would later do, like Saffron Technology, Syntech Technologies, that were defense contractors and trying to basically create use sort of predictive analytics to determine what terrorists would do next, all before 9/11 even happened. And of course there was a renewed demand for that type of technology and these sort of innovative solutions in the immediate post 9/11 era. And when this information, was reported on Total Information Awareness, there was a huge outcry throughout, U.S. mainstream media. A lot of organizations, including the ACLU and organizations like that, rightly noted that it would eliminate the constitutional right to privacy and create this very disturbing era of mass surveillance by, I think one of the mainstream media reports on it said that it would fight terrorism by terrifying U.S. citizens, basically, and making everyone a suspect under this type of this paradigm he was seeking to usher in. And so it was eventually, under pressure. It was, I think, first announced in February 2003. And by May, they attempted to change the name to Terrorism Information Awareness, trying to move away from the idea that it would be total, it would surveil absolutely everyone through a name change. But obviously, it didn't change how the program actually worked. It would still be focused on everyday Americans. A total dragnet, really. And in that same month where that name change happened, Peter Thiel incorporated Palantir. And as Palantir was developing as a company, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, the Palantir co-founders, reached out to Poindexter directly through Richard Pearl, who's a well-known neoconservative figure and was also one of the architects of the Iraq War at the Bush-era Pentagon. And, basically they hatched this plan to privatize this program, rightly calculating that if they turned it into a entirely private sector enterprise, the outrage would, essentially dissipate, which it remarkably did because, originally it was a public-private partnership housed within DARPA, and then by making it this private sector enterprise, a lot of the concerns about it disappeared, and this is arguably because by moving into the private sector, they were able to accomplish a lot more than they could have by being affiliated directly with the public sector, even though they contract with the public sector. And so Palantir, funding-wise, was set up with money from Peter Thiel himself, and that the algorithm for it had originally been developed at PayPal, and the other funding source was the CIA's In-Q-Tel. And one of the figures that helped made that funding decision was the CIA's chief information officer at the time, named Alan Wade. And Alan Wade had been one of the top allies of the Total Information Awareness with Poindexter, in the immediate post 9/11 era. And so the CIA was Palantir's exclusive exclusive client for, I believe, the first 6 years of its existence as a company. And its engineers went to Langley, CIA headquarters in Virginia every 2 weeks for several years as well, where the CIA was developing their algorithm with them, in a very direct partnership. And Alex Karp has even said that the CIA was always the intended clients of Palantir. So I guess I'll pause there, and I'm happy to go in any other direction.
Explain what it does, what the goal, what Poindexter's goal was, and what they were able to establish. I mean, the mechanics of it.
So Poindexter's goal was extremely broad. I mean, it really covered. I mean, it's absolutely staggering when you think about it. So the way it was initially sold to the public was this is a way to stop terrorism attacks before they happen, by collating so much data from all different sources, and then using it in some sort of analytic or AI to determine, if certain data points are flagging that a terrorist attack will take place here or there. But there's various different aspects of this program that didn't really get enough coverage at the time. So one is that they attempted to use free market forces to determine if a terrorism attack would happen. Before it happened, they created basically what's referred to as a terrorism futures market. It was really like a forerunner to poly market and some of these predictive markets, where people bet on things online. It was basically that, but about whether a terrorist attack will happen in the Middle East, or if there will be turmoil in the Middle East, if someone like Yasser Arafat would be overthrown. These were the kinds of things they were going to have these unnamed investors bet on. Another one was focused entirely on health, under this program called biosurveillance, which actually a lot of it Palantir helped launch with HHS during the COVID era. Things like analyzing American wastewater to determine if there is going to be an outbreak of a disease before it happens, again, with an algorithm, or basically, surveilling Americans' health data, and to determine if there will be a pandemic before it happens, or if there will be a bioterror attack. Because remember, this was also in the aftermath of the anthrax attacks. And so a lot of that, particularly on the health front, has absolutely come under the portfolio of Palantir in the years since. They now control basically all of the health data at HHS, and also the CDC under the HHS, and also the NHS in Britain as well, and have continued to expand on that front. But Palantir, also works extensively now in the private sector as well. They're a major AI engine for Wall Street banks, for example, and they have different, programs that are sold to different entities, but ultimately they are a massive contractor to essentially every U.S. intelligence agency, and that includes DHS and ICE, which a lot of the critical reporting on Palantir focuses on their contracts with ICE specifically, but all of that is intended to also be used against people that are not illegal immigrants. It's meant to be an entire dragnet of basically pre-crime, and Palantir, in concordance with Poindexter's ambitions, has been a major piloter of pre-crime technology in the United States. I think they began doing that in New Orleans initially, but they call it predictive policing is the term that they use. But a lot of other companies have attempted to also get in on this. One of the most notorious being Predpol, that was a partnership, I believe, with UCLA and LAPD or something to that effect. And they're notoriously inaccurate, and they're almost always piloted in low-income minority neighborhoods, and basically are a way in essence, what happens, because the accuracy rate is so low, is that you're creating this pipeline of people basically being sent to prison, or being caught up in crimes that are very petty. But you're just sending police to all these areas in a relatively discriminatory way. The Predpol is really outrageous, because it's like accuracy was found to be like insanely low, and they didn't phase it out despite the extreme inaccuracy. It was worse than a coin toss, essentially, and departments around the country continued to use it. And then in some of these areas where Palantir ended up leaving, another Peter Thiel-backed entity called Carbine also has a predictive policing component, but has been sort of taking over 911 emergency call systems, throughout the United States, which is, generally at the county level. But this is a company that wasn't just funded by Peter Thiel. It was funded by Jeffrey Epstein and was led for a significant amount of time by Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister. As well, and has sort of expanded outwards. So a lot of Poindexter's ambitions, unfortunately, have been becoming true at a really rapid pace, and part of this was done under the guise of combating the COVID-19 situation with data, that we needed data to solve those problems.
And are you in essence just creating profiles? I mean, these are just creating profiles for every American citizen?
Well, ultimately, I mean, that's been acknowledged now. I think there was a report on that a few months ago. The Trump administration was explicitly using Palantir to make databases on every American. But that has been done in a way that has been more covert through something called the Main Core database. That was, again, something that goes back to Iran Contra. And persists into the present. But this is sort of a way to make it a more overt program that can be used openly by law enforcement, arguably. And I would say if you look back to how the Trump administration behaved around the end of 2019, there were a spate of mass shootings, and basically their response to those was to create the legal infrastructure for pre-crime. So after the El Paso Walmart shooting and some of these shootings that happened during that time, William Barr, then Attorney General, created this program at the DOJ called DEEP that was basically created the legal infrastructure for pre-crime. And you had Trump come out and say that the way to combat these shootings was to have social media develop algorithms that flag posts to predict shooters before they can act, target some of these anonymous online message boards, and he was also considering this program he was being pitched creating a DARPA for Health, HARPA, which was actually created under Biden under the name ARPA-H. They just moved the H to the back. And the pilot program for that was being pitched during the Trump era was called Safe Homes. It's an acronym. And basically that was about using AI to scan American social media posts en masse to determine what they called early warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence, and that people that were flagged by that algorithm could then be sent to, a court-ordered physician or put under house arrest, or all sorts of possibilities were fielded. And it ultimately wasn't adopted by Trump, but these are the types of things that they were considering. And so now, given the current climate, how extremely entangled Palantir has become with the current administration, expanding even into the IRS and Treasury and mortgages, in addition to just the national security components and health components, it is rather unsettling. But a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this profiling of Americans has been going on for a long time under the guise of, what were developed by the Iran Contra crowd covertly, the continuity of government protocols in this effort by parts of the quote unquote deep state or the national security state to basically profile people they deemed unfriendly for whatever reason, people that could be potentially incarcerated in a time of political upheaval, they said. But the Reagan administration's examples of political upheaval in these cases were, one example given was widespread mass protests that were nonviolent against U.S. military intervention in Latin America, like in Nicaragua, for example, was something that could have them use these profiles they had developed on Americans then back in the 1980s and incarcerate them at a time deemed convenient or necessary by the Reagan administration. And they claimed then at the 1980s to be able to locate these so-called dissidents almost immediately based on the data they had compiled on them at that point. So imagine what it's become, over the past 25 years when we've seen a lot of these extreme surveillance capabilities and also the development of the associated technology just take off in the aftermath of 9/11, 2001.